Awesome. So let's get started. So thank you guys again for joining us to the Moving to the City Boston seminar that we have here. So we're just going to start off by introducing the team from UMass that kind of put this all together to help you guys out as to asking whichever questions that you need to ask in order to help prepare yourself if you're moving to Boston, if you're just interested in the actual city of Boston. So to start and to introduce ourselves, my name is Aaliyah Robinson. I am a junior here at UMass. I am the Alumni Relations Coordinator, a part of the Student Alumni Association. I'm going to be moderating the questions that we have here and helping out answering any questions that you guys also may have. We also have McKenna Meager, who is also signed in. She is a sophomore. She is the VP for Training and Development for the Student Alumni Association as well. She's also here. She's going to be moderating the chat for whoever has questions that they want to ask the panelists or just in general about whatever you have, whatever you just want to ask. So we both will be here logged on to answer whatever questions that you guys may have. And then, of course, we have our advisor, Lindsay McGrath. She is the Director of Student and Young Alumni Programs. She is also a great resource for you guys to use. We have her email right at the bottom if you want to ask her any questions about alumni relations, being an alum from UMass, just transitioning out of UMass this upcoming year, whatever questions that you all may have. Then I'm going to go ahead and introduce the speakers for this event. We have three amazing panelists that's just here to answer any questions, tell you about their experience on how it was for them to move to Boston, and just again answer any questions that you guys really might have for them. And also, I'm going to introduce how you guys can ask those questions. So to get started, I'm going to talk about the chat. So if you all may know or not know, if you haven't used Zoom, there is a chat button right on the bottom of your screen. Use this at any time to ask any questions that you may have. Again, McKenna's going to be the one that's going to be moderating the chat. So you'll ask a question. She'll either answer the question that you may have within the chat to you directly, or she'll wait a little bit for the panelists to answer whatever questions that they may have, and then go ahead and then upload the questions to me, and then I'll ask the panelists, and then we'll get your questions answered. I do want to point out as well that today's session is going to be recorded and later added to our online video library of career resources. So if by any chance that you might have to log out of the session, if your Wi-Fi stops working or whatever the case may be, just to reassure you that this will be uploaded to our website later. So don't feel like you'll miss anything important. And just by joining this session that you are giving us consent to be a part of this recording. So no worries, it will be available for you guys whenever you may need it. Awesome, so now let's meet the panelists. So I do wanna start with our first panelist, Eric Giovanni. He graduated in 2013 with a degree in hospitality and tourism management. He now lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and works as the Assistant Director of Graduate Studies at the Chan School of Public Health, which is really awesome. Just give us a wave there, Eric. That's Eric. Hello, Eric. Awesome. And then I'm going to move on to our next panelist, Jessica Pierre. She also graduated in 2013 with a degree in political science. She now resides in Hyde Park, Massachusetts. And she works as a public relations marketing consultant. So hello, this is Jessica right there. Awesome. And then last but not least, of course, we have Amanda Warren, who also graduated in 2013 with a degree in hospitality and tourism management. She lives in South Boston and works as the Director of Events for Boston University School of Dental Medicine. So these are all our panelists. They are really here to help you with any questions that you may have. If you are interested in whatever that they are working in right now, if you are their major, if you're not their major and you're just really interested in what's going on and how they move to wherever they are now, please stay tuned. It's going to be pretty awesome. So now we will get started with the actual questions. I do just want to give you guys another reminder that please utilize the chat. I'm going to try to answer every single question that you guys have there. So we're going to get started with the actual questions that we have. Awesome. So to kick things off, we do want to acknowledge that the majority of people are self-isolating right now in order to help curb the spread of the novel coronavirus. We understand this is an unprecedented situation, and we do want to address its impact before we get into the questions about what your city is typically like. We also hope that everyone is staying safe during this time and that these these challenging times will soon come to an end. So now specifically related to COVID-19, we're gonna start with our questions related to that. So I'm gonna start with the first question to ask the panelists, what resources specific to your city are helping you practice self-care? And anyone feel free to answer.
So one thing that has been helpful for me in practicing self-care is access to a lot of virtual events and virtual meetups. Because in Boston, I typically go to a lot of events. I'm well connected here, so I'm always out and about. And it's been interesting having to stay home every day. I already worked from home, so that transition is not um, too rough, but I'm also used to going to coffee shops and meeting my clients at their offices. So being able to have access to online community has been really important for my self-care.
Yeah, I can echo that as well. The gym that I belong to, which is specific to Boston, they quickly created a virtual platform as soon as they had to shut down because of the coronavirus, which has felt, I'm feeling really connected to them still, and they are producing a lot of online classes with all of the regular trainers that are there. So it's been really great to start my day with a workout, just kind of get my mind right to sit on the couch all day and work from home. And if I'm, too lazy to stay up to do that in the morning, I'll end it with, a walk down by the beach, which is a nice feature in Boston that we have.
Yeah, and I think part of my sort of like self-care routine is like actually keeping a routine. So instead of like waking up and working out, like working in my pajamas all day, I sort of like get up, shower, get dressed, and then I work for 7 hours. And I make sure that after 7 hours, I sort of put a hard stop and like go on to like personal things or like school work that I'm working on, just so that there's some sort of like segmentation to my day and it's not all just work for 12 hours. I think you
Thank
might
you,
be.
guys. Sorry about that. So another question related to coronavirus we do want to ask is, are you able to work remotely? And if so, how are you adjusting to the change? If there was any change, say if you already were working remotely before this all happened, is the change even more, or is this just totally a whole new experience for you as well?
Yeah, so when I first got my job, there was almost no working from home. And then I had a new manager come in and she sort of set the tone that like, if you want to work from home once a week, I think it's a good sort of like thing to learn how to do and to keep yourself accountable. And then fast forward to today where we're on week 6, I think, of working from home. And just knowing how to like access, your email or shared drives or different like services that you would use at work remotely. I've been very thankful to have had that built into sort of like my tenure at Harvard. And I think, Jessica, you mentioned that you have been working full-time from home. So I'm curious to hear how this has changed for you.
So I recently transitioned to working for myself full-time in January. And prior to that, I was working part-time. And I used to spend some days working at home and some days going into the office, but I don't like being in my house, like working in my house. I like my home to be a place of rest and relaxation. So I would always go out to like coffee shops, or if I had a meeting downtown, I would just hang out down there. Or some of my clients work at a WeWork, so I'd work at their WeWork offices. So it's been a little bit of a transition. And fortunately, in my apartment, me and my roommate, we have an extra bedroom, which I'm in right now, that we use as our office space. But now we share it. So whenever we have meetings, it's like, okay, what time do you have meetings today? Okay, I do too. We have to, okay, you go to the kitchen and you stay here. So we have to figure that aspect out, which is interesting, but I'm grateful to have like a spare bedroom that I can use. So like in the morning, similar to you, Eric, like I get up, I work out, I shower, I get dressed, and I can go to a separate living space that's not like my bedroom or my living room. So that's a good thing, but it's not something that a lot of people are fortunate to have, especially living in Boston, but I'm sure we'll get to housing there.
Yeah, I kind of like Eric said, I didn't really have the option to work from home before coronavirus, and now that we're all working from home, it's really just working through all the uncharted waters and figuring out. It took us so long to figure out all the different kinks and get into a groove with everybody and make sure everybody has everything that they need. Luckily for us, we went totally virtual, and I can still totally do my job in its full capacity from home, which I think is a learning opportunity just for my career in general. That yes, going into the office has its perks, but working from home is definitely still feasible to do to get the job done. So I'm interested to see how this kind of changes the workforce after this is all over too.
No, definitely. Thank you guys so much. I think us even logged in as students can definitely agree with that. Just the transition with the in-class learning to now learning online is totally different for us. And just keeping up with that schedule, I think, is important, even for myself, because I'll wake up and then I'm like on my Zoom, I'm taking physics with my dog right next to me, and it's just totally weird. But it is kind of reassuring that everybody is kind of in the same boat, that as long, I think, is if we keep up at least with the schedule that we kind of normally have, I think we will all be a little more sane when everything starts to die down. So thank you for that. So now moving on to our opening questions. What do you guys think the benefits of living in the city are?
I would just say that, living in Boston, it's a really cool, fun place to be. There's always something to do. There's always something going on. You're always meeting new people. It's not a sleepy city like some people might think outside of Massachusetts. If you're a foodie like me, the food scene is just getting better by the day here. Gone are the days that, you just go to the North End for a good meal. There's great restaurants popping up all over the place in all different outskirts of the city, in the city. I think that the job market has also changed exponentially over the last few years. We're seeing more and more startups move to the city, and a lot of big name technology companies are coming here too. Really like just hot names that you guys will probably recognize. Facebook has an office here, Amazon, Spotify, just to name a few. They're building new buildings all over the place too, and it's really becoming a really big hot city to move to.
And I think the overall walkability of the city, so for those who sort of like bike or run or walk, if you are in Cambridge, you could walk to like Alston or Brighton within like 45 minutes. And I feel like biking around the city has gotten better over the last few years. I feel like it's getting to the point where I even feel safe to hop on a bike with a helmet and get from point A to point B. The further that you move out of the city, and I know we'll talk about this later, it can get a little bit time consuming to hop around to the different points. The closer you are to sort of like Cambridge, Malden, Dorchester area is easier to get to the center and sort of move out. But yeah.
Yeah, I would have to agree with both of those suggestions. What I really love about Boston that I don't necessarily get in other major cities is that it's super diverse. But Boston is, like, to be quite frank, it is a very segregated city. But it's a diverse city, not just in like race and culture, but also like the food. Like, you can get access to a ton of different types of food in whatever neighborhood that you're in. You can get access to Caribbean food, Ethiopian food, Brazilian food. So that's really, really amazing. And there's also a scene for everybody. So if you're into art, there's a scene for art. If you're into poetry, there's a scene for poetry. If you're into tech, there's a scene for that. So you can find your community based off of what your interests are, which I think is really cool.
Awesome. Yeah, great points. And then I, of course, have to ask, what are the top 3 must-visit places in Boston that you guys recommend?
All right, so my favorite is probably the Esplanade, which is part of the Charles River. It's amazing to run through in the morning, at night, in the middle of the day. And with that, there's the Charles River that you can kayak on. So those are probably my top 2 right now. I can't think of a third right now.
Yeah, I would say the Harbor Walk along Boston Harbor is really beautiful. It gives you a great view of the city. Harvard Square is amazing, as Eric, I'm sure you're familiar with. I love to walk around there. And I'd say one of my favorite spots is the Green Monster at Fenway. If you're a sports fan, definitely try and score yourself some tickets to go sit up there. It's a great time.
I would say the ICA is really cool in the Seaport area. Seaport's really cool in general, but the ICA is just a really cool art museum, along with the MFA as well too. Like, it's unfortunate, but this month they were supposed to launch a Basquiat exhibit, but you know, we're all stuck at home now. But I think they're showing it virtually too, if you guys want to check that out. And then some other areas that I would recommend as well are, well, I'll type my suggestions in the comments because I need to like organize my thoughts a little bit.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. So those were the opening questions. So now I'm going to move on to questions related solely on UMass Amherst, of course.
Before you go, we have one question from the comments that kind of pertains to this section. So all of you that have commented in the chat, thank you so much. And we'll implement them in kind of as they make sense in the order of the questions. But this one came from Jack, and he's wondering, was Boston your first choice in city, or did you pick Boston and then look for a job, or did a job kind of bring you to Boston, is kind of what he's wondering.
Well, I'm born and raised in Boston, so I knew I was going to go back home. So I was looking, for me, I thought it would be easier transitioning out of college and into the real world by being in a city that I'm familiar with. And so, naturally I wanted to go back home. So I applied to jobs in Boston.
Yeah, I grew up in Massachusetts, so Boston was always just the automatic city that I thought of and felt connected to. And, in my young 20s, I wasn't really familiar with any other city at the time. So Boston was definitely just where I wanted to be right after graduation.
And same, I was born on, grew up on Cape Cod, and decided to just stay in the area.
Thank you guys for answering that question. Onward, Aaliyah.
Thank you. Awesome. So now to our UMass questions. How did your time at UMass prepare you for your current job and living situation, if it did at all?
I'll go if you guys don't have anything to say yet. But so when I was at UMass, I majored in political science. And right now, a lot of the clients that I have are either politicians or organizations that work in policy advocacy. So my degree definitely helped prepare me. But as far as getting into PR and marketing, so when I was at UMass, I was a part of a lot of different student organizations and on the executive board of a few. And I started off as a public relations officer on an executive board. And so that kind of introduced me to PR and marketing. So from there, I just started doing internships and then figured out a way to combine the two. But I credit a lot of my experience in working with RSOs to prep me for graduation. My degree is cool and all, but like if I had my degree by itself, I would not be prepared to enter the workforce.
And Jessica, just before the next panelist answers, Lena asked a question specifically for you. She's a marketing major graduating in a couple of weeks, and she's in the middle of a job search process, and she was just curious where you work. I responded back that I knew you were self-employed, but she wanted to know a little bit more about your position.
Sure. So I started off working for a lot of different political organizations when I first graduated UMass. And my first job paid me like almost nothing. So it was kind of like an internship, but it was doing what I knew I wanted to do. And it was in politics. So I just took it anyways. And I was at home with my family, so I didn't really have to worry about paying for housing and stuff like that. So I just took advantage of that. And then from there, I've worked for a number of different advocacy organizations. I worked at the Harvard Education School, and I recently worked for an organization called the Institute for Policy Studies. And then I just transitioned to working for myself. So now I manage a lot of different organizations and politicians, social media platforms. I do their public relations and greater marketing as well too.
And then just to piggyback on what Jessica was saying about a lot of the on-hands experience that UMass provided, I was a hospitality major, so we had a lot of real-life experiences that I was exposed to, a lot of on-hands training, a lot of networking events that they put on for us, and I really think that that type of learning style absolutely helped me develop not only just skills in my career, but just human skills as well, just to go out into the workforce and use. So I think about that stuff all the time. I always refer back to those kinds of things on an everyday basis now. And I'll say, like, I'm a little introverted, and I had to force myself to go out and play active roles in the community at UMass, joining clubs, becoming, you know, a ranking member in the clubs, and forcing myself to go to all those networking events and connecting with alumni like you guys are doing now. You know, you just never really know who you're going to meet and what kind of connections you're going to make, even if it's not something that you think you're going to need to utilize right now. You never know who you're going to need later down the road to help you out.
Yeah, I hear that, Amanda. I did 4 of my 5 years in residence life, and same with you. Like, it would make me really nervous to do like networking or like public speaking or to like meet people. And working in residence life, you're sort of like forced to interact with, you know, 20 residents with your meetings and sort of putting on programming. And so that sort of like repetitive like action of putting on events and like leading them helped me to sort of become a better presenter and to work with students more actively and to support them in education. And I think just being part of residence life, you make so many friends that you continue to talk to even after you graduate, and has really been one of the better pieces of UMass was working in residence life.
Nice. Again, I think we have another question also from the chat.
We had just one more kind of specific to UMass. 2 people were talking about volunteer and outreach opportunities, and whether or not you maybe did that at school, and if that carried with you to Boston, and if so, in what light. Does that make sense? Kind of combining those 2 questions.
Yeah, I can just speak on 2 things that I did volunteer-wise at the school. I don't know if I can speak on it directly impacting what I'm doing now, but I was within the Eisenberg School, and so I was an ambassador for the school. So I did a lot of different community events for them, a lot of like career day stuff for them, a lot of, you know, having the high schoolers come in who's taking tours of the school, just kind of interacting with people and getting my people skills in line for my next chapter in life. And I was also a volunteer for the big career day that HTM puts on every year, which kind of exposed me to a lot of people who are there hiring for new positions, which I thought was extremely helpful.
Perfect.
So I think a majority of my experience came from like, I guess, volunteer experience was being involved in student organizations. I can't remember, this was 7 years ago, y'all, it was a long time ago. We are approaching 10-year anniversary, but I can't remember if there were any like particular like one day or one time volunteer opportunities that I felt were like super impactful for me. But I just really remember like the student organizations, like that's where I don't know if do they still call it the source, the student okay, yeah. So like I was always in the source, just like networking with other organizations and meeting advisors and stuff like that, and that was really helpful.
And then we do just have one more sort of UMass related question before we move on to the next section. We have one person wondering, how soon after college did you move to the city? I know that was sort of indirectly answered before, but if you wanted to directly answer that, that would be great.
I moved one day after we graduated. I had to start work right away, so I didn't really get any sort of in-between time.
I spent one summer working in Provincetown using my hospitality degree for about 3 months, and then I dropped hospitality and moved into higher education, and then moved to Boston in October of the same year I graduated.
Yeah, I moved right after graduation because I went back home.
Okay, awesome. McKenna, is there any more questions from the chat?
One more that sort of ties in. Jack's wondering if you guys could say one sentence why Boston is the best city to move after college.
There's a lot of jobs and opportunities out here.
It's large enough to give you an incredible amount of opportunity, but small enough where you feel a sense of community.
Yeah, I second Amanda's.
Thank you so much, guys. I think we're good to move on to the next section, Aaliyah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you guys so much. So now we're going to move on to the next section of questions, which is going to be transportation. So the first question along this section is going to be, how did you decide that moving to the city was the best decision for you?
I mean, for me, it's where the job was. So I had put out about 12 applications at different universities and colleges in the area, and got one sort of in-person interview. And so I just, once I got the offer, I sort of just took it. But then when I actually moved to the city, I decided to move in Arlington, which is sort of like 2 towns west of the city, and sort of moving from Arlington into the city every day ended up being a pain in the neck. My commute sometimes was close to 2 hours. And in the winter, when there were really bad storms and the train wouldn't work or the bus was late, it could have been like 2.5 hours each way. So I think, I definitely paid a lot less to live in Arlington, but made up for that in hours commuting.
Yeah, I followed work as well, but I definitely targeted Boston to be where I wanted to go. I interned for a company for 2 summers in school, and then was offered a position right out of college to work for that same company. So I went straight to their Boston office, and just kind of piggybacking on what I had said before, Boston was always just that city that I could feel familiar with, so I didn't really apply anywhere else.
So like I mentioned before, I was born and raised here in the city in Boston. And so I was used to taking public transportation to school and getting around. And I actually have never owned a car before. I still don't own a car. I just moved. So I grew up in Hyde Park, which is it's in the city, but it's a little bit further away from like the downtown South End area, which is where a lot of companies are and a lot of like where the action and like the good food is. But I used to live in Dorchester a year after I graduated, I moved to Dorchester. And then I lived there for 5 years, and commuting when I used to work downtown or getting anywhere, Dorchester is a very central location. So I could take the commuter rail to go downtown and it would take me 10 minutes. Fortunately, where I live in Hyde Park now, I still have access to the commuter rail. So maybe it takes me about 20 minutes to get downtown. But like things like going to the grocery store and stuff, like fortunately all my friends have cars and my little brother has a car. My dad has a car. So if I ever need a car, I can have access to it, just borrow it really quickly. So I don't know if I would recommend not getting a car at all, depending on where you live in the city. If you live in somewhere like Hyde Park, you might want to get a car. But when I lived in Dorchester, it was super easy to just get around through public transportation. Of course, like, weather, it can get a little crazy, or if the MBTA like broke down or something like that. But yeah, so those were my means of transportation.
Can I just piggyback on something Jessica said too about that? So I've actually also lived in New York City. So I moved to Boston right out of school, and then my job took me to New York City for a few years, and I've since moved back to Boston because I do love it that much, and I knew this is where I wanted to be. And I sold my car when I moved to New York because you just really do not need a car when you live in New York City. And I lived back here in Boston for about a year and a half without a car, and just recently got one a few months ago, just because I live in South Boston. And so you can definitely get away with not having one. I just got to a point where paying for Ubers to get myself to and from the grocery store was just becoming a little old and a little too much on my budget. So in terms of a budget standpoint, it did make more sense for me to keep my car just because I do live slightly outside of the city. So parking is a bit easier too.
Nice. Thank you guys so much. So that's pretty much the basis of transportation. I don't believe we have any follow-up questions on that. So now I'm going to move on to housing. I think this is really popular for students to ask. So the first question I'm going to ask is, if someone was moving to Boston alone, how would they find somebody to live with?
So I would, so there's a lot of housing group me's, which I think is great. And they target millennials, there's some that's for people who are straight out of college. So I would see if you could kind of like tap into people you know who live in Boston and see if they know somebody that's looking for a roommate, because I feel like people are always moving, especially with having such a high population of students here. So there's always different housing opportunities that are available, but definitely see if you could find a group me. Some people use Facebook or Craigslist. I don't know how safe they are, so I'm just throwing out ideas, but not necessarily recommending anything. And don't be afraid to ask your job if you got a job, if they can connect you to somebody, or if they know someone in their network who's renting out an apartment or something. Fortunately for me, my roommate now, like we went to UMass together. We actually went to like elementary school, junior high school in UMass together. And then my roommates before that went to UMass with me as well. So because I kind of kept in touch with my UMass community, I was able to find roommates. But yeah, just tap anybody you know who lives in Boston, reach out. Don't be afraid to ask your job if they have any suggestions on people who may have any rooms or apartments available as well too. And then group me and check out Facebook and Craigslist if it's safe.
Yeah, I mean, I used Craigslist when I first got to the city, and it worked out for me for a few reasons. One, I found a nice apartment, and two, there wasn't a broker fee. It was actually a guy who owned his own house. So I think if it's your first time getting an apartment in Boston, if you can find a sublet that doesn't require a broker fee, that will save you like at least a full month's worth of rent, which could be a lot if you're coming right out of college. And then every time we've had to sort of like fill a space in our apartment, we've used sort of our Facebook connections just to find people who wanted to live in the area. It was in their budget, and sort of just interviewed people and met them. And I've been here for about 6 years and have never had an issue finding people or finding an apartment, although it's getting a little bit pricey, but there are apartments out there.
Yeah, I'll just echo both of what Jessica and Eric said. Social media is such a beautiful tool that we have to use these days. And I'd say once we're able to go back out and go meet people in person, definitely utilize the UMass receptions and alumni events that they put on, because like I said, you just never know who you're going to meet. You might meet someone and they have a friend who's looking for a spot that same month that you're trying to move to Boston. So I think it's really all about just putting yourself out there and utilizing all the tools you have available to you.
Awesome. Thank you guys. And another question, what specific documents are needed when you are moving into your own place?
I'll start. So I've been asked for sort of like income documents. So like proof of earnings. I've been asked to complete sort of a credit check to make sure that my credit was above a certain threshold. The first apartment that I lived in, Arlington, required none of that. he just wanted to see a letter that I had a job. My current place where I live now, they wanted like all the documents, like letters of recommendation from previous landlords, a credit check, proof of income for like a full year, and like, you know, bank saving statements. So I think it can really vary depending on the property management company and the landlord. And once you're in an apartment, if you're lucky enough to stay there for a few years, I feel like you build that relationship with your landlord where they're a little more lax about things. You can sort of just like re-sign the lease and bring in a new person. But I'd say the spectrum can be quite wide.
Yeah, Eric, you kind of hit it right on the head there with all of that. It really just depends on who you're working with. If it's directly with a landlord, if it's directly with a property owner, a realtor, everybody kind of has their own information that they want because they're ultimately trying to rent it out to a specific type of person, obviously. So they're really just trying to make sure that you can make the rent, and whatever kind of proof they need for that, they'll make sure to ask you. I think if I remember correctly, my first apartment moving to Boston, obviously it was our first job, so we didn't really have much to prove or sort of, you know, a year's worth of income. So I believe I provided my offer letter from the job to just explain my salary so that we can prove to them that we are making money and we can make the rent. And I think that I had to get a letter of recommendation from the landlord back at UMass as well, which was helpful. So if you guys are renting right now, make sure you keep a good relationship with your landlords out in Amherst, because you might need to use them.
Awesome, thank you. Was there a quick question that we needed to answer, McKenna, in the chat?
Yeah, just a quick one regarding housing. A couple of different people mentioned living in different neighborhoods, and we did highlight where you guys lived now, but I think people were wondering, do you have any recommendations for college students going to the city, or maybe where is easiest to find housing and that kind of thing?
I don't think there's any particular neighborhood that it's easy to find housing. Housing is expensive and tough throughout Boston, to be honest. To be very frank, it's very expensive. But like I mentioned before, when I lived in Dorchester, I had a shorter commute, but it was also like a very busy, loud, highly populated area, which was fine for me at the time. Like, I grew up in like the woods of Boston. So Hyde Park is like kind of a suburb. It's like a cross between like a suburban area and a city. And this is where I grew up. And like literally I would see like deers and like wild turkeys. And so being in the city after graduation was fun for me because everything was super close. Like I was close to all the action. But I decided to move back to Hyde Park because I wanted a backyard. I wanted to live somewhere that was a little bit more quiet and residential. I have a few high schools right around the corner from me, and I'm so close in walking distance to like grocery stores and like CVS and like the bus and the train. But it's way more quiet. Like I wake up to birds chirping and not my neighbors playing loud music or sirens. So personally for me, Hyde Park is perfect for where I am at in my life right now. But when I was younger, I definitely preferred the city.
Can I give one piece of advice outside of this sort of question? I feel like a lot of people will be securing their living situation without maybe seeing their apartment. And so when you look at photos online, a lot of them are a little bit stretched or distorted. I would just ask for the dimensions of all the rooms so that you really have a sense of the apartment that you're moving into, and how big it actually is, because I think that the photos can be overestimated on how large a room is or how big a closet is. And it's better to be just real with what you're paying for than to be surprised when you get here.
Yeah, just to kind of echo what Jessica was saying about, living just like slightly outside of the city, all of the different little outskirts of Boston, you can hop on either the T or the bus and get to downtown Boston in 10 minutes or less. And it's just so nice to if you're working right in the city, it's so nice to just like come slightly outside to, leave work and all the hustle and bustle there and then come home to a nice quiet neighborhood, which is actually what I did in New York as well. Unless you're really looking to live down in the hustle and bustle where it's loud and, everyone is always there at all times, I definitely recommend just looking in some of the smaller little communities just right outside of Boston. Charlestown, South Boston, Dorchester, Hyde Park, Brighton, Allston, they're all just like right outside, and you'll save on rent too.
Thank you guys for that. Those are awesome points. And now we're going to move on to the last section of the questions, believe it or not, and it's going to be budget. So when you guys left UMass, were you ready right away to move to Boston, or did you kind of move home to save up and then move to Boston, or was it right away? I know that some of you guys pointed that out, but I just wanted to give you guys a question just to answer it all together.
Sure, I'll go first. Emotionally, yes, I was ready to move right into the city right away. I was super eager to start that next chapter in my life. Financially, no, absolutely not. You kind of make it work as you go. Like I said, I did have to start work right away. Luckily for me, though, I did live about 30 minutes outside of the city for that summer period right after graduation before the fall with my sister and brother-in-law. So I did take the commuter rail every day to and from the city for that summer. And then when my friends were ready to move to Boston in the fall, that's when I moved and really kicked my finances into gear and figured it out as I went.
Oh, go ahead, Eric.
So I used the summer between graduating and starting to sort of save up as much as I could. And then I lived with my friend from UMass, his family in Charlestown for 2 months to save even more before I could basically afford to do like first, last, and security. And so I think that really being honest with your budget before going into it, because you want to make sure that you're good week to week and sort of just aware of what you need to survive like, a full year. And for me, that was, I think, about 6 months of sort of working and paying as little rent as possible to really get that head start.
Yeah, so Boston is an expensive city. I lived at home for a year, but I didn't really have a plan where it was like, I'm gonna live at home for a year, then I'm gonna move out. But I had the opportunity to move out. One of my really good friends, her mom was renting out the 3rd floor of her home. And so we just moved in there, and our rent was super cheap, which was great because I was working in the nonprofit industry at the time, entry-level job. So I was definitely not making that much money. And I also worked 2 jobs up until I was finally making a salary that I felt comfortable with. So I would work, I had a retail job, I worked at a restaurant on top of my 9 to 5 because I could cover my expenses, but I also like to travel. So I like to make sure that I had a little bit of extra money and some extra income coming in to just, live the lifestyle that I wanted to live. But I wouldn't, if you can like stay with somebody that you know, or if you can stay at home with your family, I would highly, highly recommend it. I don't know what's going to happen with the economy now, but a lot of my friends, they stayed home until they could save up to buy a house. And they ended up buying a multifamily property that they're now renting out and making money off of, or they don't have to pay rent because, or their mortgage because the people renting the apartment are paying it for them. So definitely be smart. Don't be in a rush to move on your own if you know that you may not be able to afford it, because you don't want to put yourself in a financial hole. And you also want to make sure you're tapping into different resources. And, I still have friends that live home with their parents now, because it's like, you got to decide, is it worth paying rent in Boston, or is it worth staying at home with my family and saving that and investing in something that makes more sense? So definitely make a smart decision and do what you can to save as much as possible.
Thank you guys. Great point. And then one other question we have is, were there any expenses you didn't expect prior to moving to Boston?
Realtors and brokers fees. I was totally unaware of those prior to moving to the city because I don't think that it was a thing, renting out in Amherst. Basically what that is the landlord will list their property with a third party person, and that person will be the one that markets the unit. And so you're paying the realtor to do that. And you will meet with the realtor. They're the ones that will show you the unit, answer all your questions. They'll process your application for you, do all of your documentation. And you may never even see your landlord. So you do have to pay that fee, and it is typically up to 1 month's rent. So, whether you are renting a 3-bedroom apartment with 2 of your friends, it's not just your portion, it's the full unit's worth of rent. So first, last, security, and the realtor fee is a lot to save up for. And just to kind of piggyback on what Jessica was saying about finances, my first job right out of school barely paid my bills, but because it was right in the city, I didn't have an option to not live out of the city at that point. And so I just really had to talk with myself, and I said, you know what, you have to make sure that your rent and all of your bills are paid first before you go off spending any money on yourself. And so just on a budget standpoint, like that's definitely what I did. I made sure that everything was taken care of first, and then whatever was left over after that was all taken care of was my spending money. So if that turned out to be $20 for the rest of the month, then I made sure that I made my own coffee for myself that month instead of treating myself to Starbucks every day. So it's, you learn as you go. It's a trial and error until you have your system in place and you figure it all out. But nothing is ever really laid out for you. You just kind of have to figure it out as you go.
Yeah, and I underestimated how much it costs to like furnish your apartment. So if you're coming from, a dorm, or if you lived in an apartment in Amherst, chances are you don't have a lot of furniture or a lot of like cutlery or plates or cooking utensils. Something that we did, I think this still happens, it's like Alston Christmas, which is basically like August 31st and September 1st, like Labor Day weekend, everyone moves out. And people who don't want to take their stuff, they just like leave couches and tables and lamps and like plates on the street. And you can just go through with like a bag and just take whatever you want. You clean it. But if you're okay with hand-me-down furniture, like it's better than paying, $800 for a couch. And that's actually how we furnished most of our apartment. It's eclectic, which is a look, but until we can afford to like furnish the whole thing, it'll do.
Yeah. Austin Christmas, like definitely take advantage of that. So for me in the winter time, oh my gosh. So as somebody who does not have a car and takes public transportation in the winter, I was forever taking Ubers. So that's something to definitely keep in mind, that in the wintertime, not only is it really cold, but it's the MBTA just does not function as well in the wintertime. So just keep that in mind when you're moving here, because the winters can get pretty brutal. So, some days the trains aren't going to work. You're going to get to, the train station. You're going to see like 1,000 people, and you're going to be like, oh my God, I need to be at work in 45 minutes, and I'm not going to get there in 2 hours. So just something to keep in mind.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. And I just want to cue back to McKenna. I think she has one question from the chat to ask you guys.
Yeah, so one related to budgeting. This is a specific question, so if you don't feel comfortable sharing exactly how it breaks down, that's totally fine. But we have one person wondering if you could share a little bit about percentages in regards to like how much you allocate to rent versus transportation, food, and utilities. If you don't have that broken down into specific numbers, but just a ballpark, I think would be really helpful.
So I'm happy to just tell you how much I pay for rent now. So I live in a 3-bedroom apartment, and it's pretty upgraded. It's great. It's really nice. We have a backyard in a nice residential area, and altogether we pay $26.50 a month. So me and my roommate split it. That's $13.25. which is really high, and the highest I've ever paid for rent. And it's definitely it could be a mortgage. So that's just something to consider as well too. A lot of times like your rent will equal like what it would actually take if you bought a home. And then as far as food goes, so before we were we had to stay at home, I would go out to eat a lot, but that was like my preference and my way of like getting together with people and like my friends. So that's something that you definitely have to budget for, but cook if you can. And I guess now that I'm home, like I'm probably spending like $200 every other week on groceries, which is not that bad compared to doing groceries and going out to eat. And then what else? Utilities. So electricity is not bad at all. It's average. But gas, if you live in an apartment that the heating is through gas, like understand that in the winter months, you're going to be paying a lot more money than you would in the warmer months. And then, I mean, what other utilities are there? I guess like internet. I don't have cable, but I have Wi-Fi, and I pay for Netflix and stuff like that. So that's just another thing to consider as well too. But your rent will be high.
Yeah, if you can find apartments where they're going to do water, I would caution against that. Water can be pretty expensive because you have to pay to sort of shuttle the water in and send the water out of the house. Like a 2 or 3 bedroom, it could be close to 140 a month, at least where I was looking. So for our apartment, we pay about $10.50 a month each for our place in Cambridge, and then what else was I gonna say? I lost it, but I'll come back.
Yeah, so I am also paying $1,300. There's 3 of us here in South Boston. I think that's around 1,000 to 1,500. I think is about the average that you're going to be looking at least for my area. And it sounds like about the same for Jessica's area as well. And yeah, I think that it's not all inclusive. There's utilities on top of that. There's your bus pass, your T pass. There's groceries and Ubers and all that stuff that you definitely have to factor into your living expenses. It's not just boiled down to rent. And kind of what Jessica said about, we don't know how what we're going through right now is going to affect the economy and the real estate market once we come out of this. So for juniors who are graduating and looking to move to Boston in the fall, hopefully it positively affects the real estate market for us so that prices will go down. But I would say that those numbers are definitely the average around Boston.
And I'll add one thing. I'll also caution people to be careful with using credit cards when they first move to any city. I think that it can be a really easy way to sort of pay for things up front and sort of saying, well, I'll pay it off over the next few months. But if you are new to credit cards and you start to really look at the interest rate and how it's calculated, and it can get really out of hand really quickly. And I think it's better to sort of be aware of that now. And if you know that you're coming to Boston with a certain salary, as soon as you get to the city, I would just track your expenses for a few months, because it really helps you look at what you're spending on food, if you drinking, travel, transportation. Like when I lived in Arlington, I was paying, $120 in Uber every month. And I was like, well, I could just pay more to live closer to the city at that rate. So like really figuring out where you're spending your money. We use an app called Expenses OK. And you just type in the amount as you go and you can categorize it. And then at the end of the month, you see, all right, I'm spending this much on food out. Like maybe I could pull it back once or twice a week. And the whole credit card thing, just be careful with it. It can get real messy.
Thank you guys so much for sharing that. Just before we close with our last closing question, we had 3 questions that didn't fit specifically into a section. So the first one was from a senior who's wondering what was the hardest part about transitioning from life at UMass to life in the city for you guys?
For me, I would say the hardest part was like building my professional network. So my first job out of college was at a very, very small nonprofit. There was only like 3 of us, and I worked with people who were a lot older than me, so I didn't get to make a lot of friends in the workplace. And then I'm a first generation college graduate, so I didn't really have like a lot of professional mentors or a lot of professional people around me. So that's when it was like going to networking events and just really going on Eventbrite and going on Facebook and seeing what's happening so I could build that network, because I honestly did not know what I was doing when I started off, when I was thinking about like what I wanted my career trajectory to be and how I wanted to grow as a professional in the city. And I also found that it was very weird spending the fall in Boston, because I'm so used to spending the fall at UMass. So I thought it was like so weird being like, oh my God, it's the fall and I'm here and not at school. So that was like an interesting transition for me as well. But like finding my network and my community, that was tough. Boston can be cliquey, just to be transparent. It can be hard to meet people and like make new friendships sometimes, at least in my experience, but you know, just don't give up and try to research spaces that you like. And Boston people are not known for being the most friendliest, but I swear once you talk to us, like the RBF goes away and we smile and we're cool, but we just look intimidating at first.
I think for me, the biggest transition was, going from walking around the campus all day long, like sitting at a desk for like 8 or 9 hours, and then going home and sitting on a couch. Like my physical activity completely plateaued until I figured out how to create like a normal working out regimen, or like leaving my desk to go for walks and not taking lunch at my desk. So I think just like staying physically and mentally engaged was the biggest transition.
Just as like a funny story to that, I was so uncomfortable in my new work clothes and my first job. It took me so long to adjust from, my UMass hoodie and my jeans in class to my professional work clothes. It was a huge adjustment. And for me, I'd say just like finding your own system, just because obviously when you're in school, your schedule is built for you. You wake up, you go to class, you do your thing, you go to the dining hall. When you're out and no one's telling you what to do, it's all up to you to create your own schedule for you. You have to make sure that you get to work on time by the public transportation. You have to make sure that you go to the grocery store so that you're not spending money on pizza all the time. And it's just really figuring out how to make sure that you have a good system in place. Because like I said, it's not, all laid out for you. You do have to figure it out on your own. So I think that was a really big adjustment for me.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Those are awesome little bits of information that I never thought about changing into work clothes and not getting to wear leggings and sweatshirt every day. So noted on that one. All right, another question. This was kind of written in a couple different ways, but a lot of people were wondering about the job market and if in your specific field it's really competitive, or if there's a lot of opportunity in Boston, or if you chose Boston because you love the city more than all of not the opportunity, but you know what I mean, just trying to get a little bit more specific towards your job fields.
I can start on that one. So I'm an event manager. So my field is very competitive because usually there's only one of me or a few of me in a small team at either a larger organization, or you eventually start your own business out of it. So for me, I wasn't just applying for an administrative role to kind of build myself in the corporate world. I was very much so targeting the event industry because I always knew I wanted to be an event manager. And so to kind of build yourself up in that industry, it took a very long time. Yeah, that's my story.
Yeah, I would echo that as well. It depends on the good thing about Boston is that there's a ton of different industries here. So your profession, depending on what it is, sometimes it could be applied to different things. Like I work in PR and marketing. So I've worked at a number of different organizations or different fields, but like the work is essentially the same, just in a different industry. So it really depends. And I would also say that, like, go in with the mindset that sometimes you have to start, you just have to get your foot in the door, even if it's not necessarily the position that you want, but just going in and getting into the company that you want to be in, and also being strategic about figuring a pathway to actually get to where you want to go. So like I said, when I first started off, my job was a co-op. It was meant for a Northeastern student, but I interviewed for it anyways and got it. So I was making very little money, but I did a lot of great work. So I got promoted and started making a little bit more. And then my supervisor at the time, her old job was hiring for a position that was a good fit for me. So she gave me a recommendation. So I ended up going there. And then it was still an entry-level job, but I got my job to like pay for me to take courses on the Harvard Extension School website. So like just thinking about like what you can do in the moment to get professional development, make good connections to get to where you want to go. So sometimes you just have to go down that longer journey or that longer path. But the good thing about the city is that there's a lot of great resources to support you in whatever it is that you want to do. Boston's also a great place for anybody who wants to be an entrepreneur. I'm an entrepreneur myself. There's a lot of great accelerator programs, a lot of great events, and just a lot of great people to connect with. So just understand that sometimes you have to create your own pathway, and it might take a little bit longer, but the experience is worth it.
And just building off of that, so working in higher education, there are a ton of open jobs all of the time, and they might be that entry-level position. But I will tell you, I've been at the School of Public Health for a little over 5 years now, and I see those entry-level positions filled, and then 9 months later, that person has left to become a manager of something. And so it really is just like saying, for the first year or two, I'm gonna do this to get the foundation, understand the systems that exist within the institution, and then before you know it, like you're applying for jobs that are 2 or 3 grades higher than where you are now. And it really is just like being okay with being where you are. And then the networking piece is huge in higher ed.
I just wanted to kind of chime in. Jessica, you kind of reminded me to say this, that I'm at a point in my career where I am going to start thinking about branching off and thinking about starting something on my own, just because I'm kind of at that point right now with event management. And so I'm at a point where I'm going to start going to networking events again and put myself out there and spruce up my resume. So just so everybody knows, just because you go out into the workforce this one time doesn't mean that you're done. You're going to be always changing, and you're going to be always sprucing things up, and you're going to be introduced to the new fresh thing that you might start being interested in, and it's always changing. And so I just wanted to make sure that you guys knew that just because you start in this career doesn't mean that you can't pivot and go do something else.
Thank you guys so much for sharing about that. And then I have one last question before we kind of close out with that last question. But someone has kind of a specific one, that circumstance has led this person to need to live in a 1-bedroom apartment in Boston. And this person is spending about $2,000 on rent a month. And they were wondering if this was normal, or if you had any experience in this sort of situation or knew anyone that did, to know if that price is normal.
I think it depends on where you are in the city, but 1-bedrooms do tend to be very expensive. I still don't really know why. If you guys know why, feel free to chime in. But the bigger the apartment, the more people you can fill in, so the cheaper the rent, is essentially the rule of thumb that I've always understood. I lived on my own at one point, just outside of the city, and was paying an exorbitant amount. So I feel you, and I do think that 1-bedrooms, for whatever reason, are higher priced in the market.
Yeah, I had a friend who lived in downtown in a 1-bedroom, and I think he was paying about $1,700, and that was 3 or 4 years ago. So it's probably right on par with cost of living increases.
Yeah, same. I had a friend who, when I was younger because I'm old now, but I had a friend who was living in the Back Bay area, and she had a studio, and the studio was about $1,700. But I think, you know, if you're okay with living a little bit outside of the city, it'll definitely be cheaper. I have a friend right now who lives in an area called Reedville, which is right outside of Hyde Park, but still very accessible to Boston. And he pays $13.75 for a 1-bedroom apartment, not a studio, but an actual apartment with laundry and everything. So he's living there now. So if you're okay with, like, you know, sacrificing living in, like, you know, Back Bay or downtown, then you might be able to find something cheaper. But if you prefer to be, because I know people that like live downtown and like walk to work, which is amazing. But if you prefer to be in that area, then it's going to be a little bit higher.
Awesome. Thank you guys for answering that. Leah, I think we're good to head on to the next question.
Awesome. So those were all the questions. So now we're just going to give you guys a final wrap-up question for the students that are in here. And it will be, what last advice would you give students that are planning to make this move to Boston?
Definitely save as much money as possible, because, you know, the theme here is that Boston can get very expensive. Try to be creative, try to be resourceful. Don't feel pressured into keeping up with the Joneses, or, you know, getting your own place if you don't have to. So just be smart about your finances, because once you're in a hole here, it's really hard to get out because the expenses are really high. Negotiate your salaries and try to get as much money as possible from your jobs. I feel like that's a skill that a lot of us don't know after graduating, that we can always ask for more. So make sure you're getting, as you know, do your research. What is the top salary that people are getting in your role and in your industry, and ask for that. Don't be afraid to ask for what you deserve, but definitely save as much as possible.
Yeah, and I would just say that, you know, things aren't always going to work out just as you plan them. There's going to be bumps in the road, and that's okay. That's how you learn, and it's how you learn to be an adult. Take those challenges and definitely turn them into opportunities, I always like to say. You're going to learn Boston by trial and error. Nothing's ever going to be totally laid out for you. You know, as Jessica said, do your research, make sure you pay your bills on time. Credit scores are a real thing when you get in your late 20s. Don't abuse credit cards, like Eric said. Embrace your student loans when those hit come November. I'm still paying them off to this day to come. And just really enjoy your 20s in this really great city that I personally love. You don't get your early 20s back. So live it up as much as you can, for sure.
Yeah, I would say figure out what your loan payments are going to be and factor that into your budget before you commit to a salary or a rent. And if you don't know how to cook yet, learn how to cook. Even if it's pretty basic meals, I think Jessica had mentioned this, you will see your food bill go down so much if you just cook the majority of your stuff at home. But that being said, it's an amazing food city. So don't not treat yourself when you're here.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. So we're just going to wrap up with some closing thoughts. Awesome. So just some closing thoughts. We want to thank all of the panelists for joining us tonight. We hope that you leave this session with more information about moving to a new city. And with that being said, I just want to point out the career services that UMass Amherst Alumni Association provides. So for one, we have the alumni advisors, and this is where students can get advice from actual alumni. And a lot of the times they're going to partner you up with alumni that either study the same major that you have, or they just they have the same career interests as you as well. So definitely take a part of this career advice that we have here. Then we also have career counselors. And these are people that can guide you on your career path, just in general, what you want to do post UMass in terms of your career, what your degree can actually prepare you for in the workforce. And then lastly, we just have events that go on all year round with the UMass alumni. We have many virtual events that we actually have going on right now to help support you. And just to point out what events that we even have coming up. So today, of course, we had the Moving to the City Boston panel. And then next week, we're going to have Chicago, moving to Chicago. That's going to be on the 27th of April. And then we have moving to LA, which is going to be on the 29th. You can all definitely register for those as well if you want any other questions about moving to those kind of cities, but that's also available for students also. But all these career advice and information is going to be on this link right here. If you visit umassalumni.com/career, you can learn more about any other resources that the UMass Alumni Association has to offer for students right now. So again, we want to thank you guys so much, and to please follow us on all social media platforms. Everything that you're hearing here and where you can find this uploaded recording is going to be on these platforms. We're going to keep you guys updated on all year round of what's going on with alumni around us, just to get you guys more, I guess I would say, ahead of the game, so you know what's going on with UMass alum. And if you're part of the UMass class of 2020, where you can be and how you can give back to UMass as an alum as well. So with that being said, thank you guys so much. Thank you to the panelists, and thank you to the guys that came to just hear what these guys have to say. But with that being said, you guys are all set, and thank you guys again.